Sarah Nwosu was born in a small town in Anambra State, the second child of a primary school teacher and a seamstress. Her parents were not rich, but they were careful people, the kind who budgeted in a notebook and kept receipts, the kind who told their children, "Your education is the land we are buying for you." Her father smelled of chalk and palm wine on Fridays. Her mother's hands were always warm, always slightly calloused from the sewing machine. She was 8 years old when her mother collapsed at the market. A stroke, they said. She died 3 days later in a government hospital that had no power and no drugs. Her father tried. He really did. He remarried within a year, not because he did not love his first wife, but because there were children to feed, and a man alone in that kind of town is a man slowly drowning. The stepmother was not cruel. She was simply indifferent. And sometimes indifference does more damage than cruelty, because at least cruelty makes you feel seen. When Sarah's father died of hypertension 4 years later, she was 12. Her younger brother, Emeka, was 9. They were sent to their father's people, specifically to their uncle Obinna and his wife Chidinma, who lived in Onitsha and had a 2-bedroom flat and 3 children of their own. There was no formal discussion, no sitting down, and no asking the children what they needed. They were simply packed into a bus with their belongings and delivered, like parcels. Sarah adapted. That was what she did. She learned quickly what was expected of her. She was to cook, to clean, to help with the younger children, or to make herself useful enough to justify the space she took up in that flat. Her brother Emeka was sent to a boarding school 2 years later on a scholarship he had earned with his own brilliance. And after he left, Sarah was completely alone inside that house. Not physically. The flat was always full of noise and movement. But emotionally, she was alone in a way that hollowed her out slowly, like water carving stone. She managed to complete secondary school by studying at night after the dishes were done. She sat her exams twice. She passed. Nobody celebrated. Nobody even mentioned it. Aunt Chidinma asked her to mop the corridor the same morning her results came out. Sarah mopped the corridor. Then she went to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and cried quietly for exactly 4 minutes. Then she stood up, washed her face, and went back to cooking. She got a place at a polytechnic in Awka through a government bursary. She deferred it twice because she had no money for transport, textbooks, or accommodation. In the 3rd year, she resolved that she was going. She began saving from the small amounts she earned, helping a neighbor sell fabric at the Onitsha main market. She hid the money in the back of her Bible, behind the book of Job, which she chose deliberately, because she felt that was the one book that could understand her. And then the evening came. The evening everything shattered. It started with a missing sum of money. 12,000 naira had disappeared from the house, and Aunt Chidinma was certain, with a certainty that needed no evidence, that Sarah had taken it. Perhaps it was easier to believe that. Perhaps it was convenient. The truth, which came out weeks later, was that her cousin Tobena had used the money to buy airtime and data to impress a girl in his class. But that truth arrived too late. That evening, Aunt Chidinma stood in the middle of the parlor and said, in a voice so controlled it was almost gentle, "Pack your things. This house is not a charity." Uncle Obinna sat in his chair and watched the television. He did not look up. He did not speak. And in that silence, he said everything. Sarah stood very still for a moment. She looked at the room, the plastic-covered sofa she had cleaned 100 times, the curtain she had ironed every Saturday for 7 years, the photograph of her uncle's family on the wall, in which she did not appear. And she understood, perhaps for the first time with complete clarity, that she had never truly belonged here, and she had been a servant, a function, a pair of hands. She walked to the room she shared with her cousins. She put her Bible in the black nylon bag, her one good dress, her leaving school certificate in its brown envelope, the one certificate she had managed to keep dry and flat all these years, a sachet of water, and the small notebook where she had written down every naira she had saved, 4,200 naira. The last entry read, August 16th, market, 800 naira. She tied the bag, walked out. Nobody said goodbye. The youngest cousin, a 5-year-old girl named Chisholm, was sitting on the floor by the door, playing with a rubber ball. As Sarah passed, Chisholm looked up and said, "Auntie Sarah, where you to go?" Sarah bent down. She touched the little girl's cheek, and she said, "I'm going somewhere nice." Then she stepped outside into rain that had been building all afternoon and was now falling hard and fast, the way grief sometimes does. Quietly at first, and then all at once. It was 8:30 at night. The streets of Onitsha were wet and loud with the sound of generators and distant music. Sarah had no plan. She had an aunt in Enugu whom she had not spoken to in years. She had a friend from secondary school who had moved to Lagos and whom she owed a phone call she had been too ashamed to make. She had 4,000 naira and a Bible and a certificate in a brown envelope that was already getting wet. She started walking. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it takes to walk into a rainy night with nothing but a nylon bag and 4,000 naira and your dignity intact. Ask yourself, what would you have done in her position? Would you have walked back and begged? Would you have broken down right there on that street? Let us know in the comments. Because what Sarah did next, and how she carried herself through those next hours, is something that will stay with you. She walked for about 40 minutes before the rain became impossible. She had been heading in the rough direction of the motor park, not because she had money for a bus to Enugu, but because motor parks in Nigerian cities are one of the few places you can stand in a crowd at night without someone immediately asking what you are doing there. There is a kind of anonymity in noise. Her sandals were soaked through. The nylon bag was doing a reasonable job of protecting the Bible and the certificate, but not much else. And the street lighting was unreliable. Some poles had bulbs, some had been dark for years, and the road surface was uneven, pocked with potholes that had filled with brown water. She had eaten nothing since noon, a small bowl of rice and a piece of fish that she had portioned for herself after serving everyone else. She passed a mama put, one of those roadside food stalls lit by a kerosene lamp, where a stout woman in a head tie was dishing out plates of soup to a group of men on benches. The smell of egusi and stockfish hit her so hard she had to stop walking. She stood at a distance, watching steam rise from the pots, and she was so hungry she actually closed her eyes for a moment just to feel the smell more completely. She calculated that a plate of soup in Iba would cost at least 500 naira. She could not afford it. She kept walking. About a kilometer from the motor park, on a long stretch of road flanked by locked shops and one petrol station with its forecourt lights blazing, she sat down on a low concrete ledge at the base of a closed pharmacy. Not because she gave up. She sat down because one of her sandal straps had snapped. She took both sandals off, put them in the bag. The bag was already full enough to protest, and sat for a moment in her bare feet on wet concrete, rain dripping from her hair, and she tried to think. Where was she actually going to sleep tonight? The bus to Enugu, if she managed to get a seat, would not arrive until past midnight. And when she got there, her aunt in Enugu, a woman named Ngozi, had remarried and had a new life and a husband who did not know Sarah well. Showing up on her doorstep past midnight, and soaking wet, was not a plan. It was a prayer. She did not know if the prayer would be answered. She was still thinking, sitting on that ledge, when she heard the engine. It was not speeding. That was the first thing she noticed. Most cars on that road at that hour were moving fast, throwing up spray, their drivers anxious to be home. This one was moving slowly. It was a dark-colored Toyota Land Cruiser, the kind of vehicle that announces, without needing to say anything, that the person inside it does not struggle for petrol money. The hazard lights came on. The car pulled to the side of the road about 10 meters in front of her and stopped. Sarah did not move. She had grown up in Onitsha. She knew what it meant when a car full of men stopped near a young woman alone at night. She picked up the bag, ready to run if she needed to. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. The driver's window came down. One person in the car, a man, perhaps in his late 40s, with gray at his temples and glasses that were slightly fogged from the rain outside. He looked out at her with an expression she could not immediately classify. It was not lust, it was not threat. It was something slower than that. Concern, maybe, or curiosity. He said, "Are you all right?" 3 words, in a voice that was measured and quiet. The kind of voice that had learned not to need to raise itself to be heard. Sarah said, "I am fine, sir." He looked at her bare feet, at the nylon bag, at the rain coming down on her. And he said, "You don't look fine." And the honesty of that statement, the simple, unadorned truth of it, I caught her off guard so completely that for a second she almost laughed. She said, "My sandal broke. I am going to the motor park." He said, "I'm going past the motor park if you want to ride." He said it simply. He didn't lean out of the window. He didn't smile in a way that suggested something. He just said it and waited, watching her face with the kind of patience that suggested he was prepared for her to say no. Sarah stood in the rain for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which she weighed every instinct she had. And then she walked to the car and got in. If this story has you still watching, comment, "I'm still watching." Let's see who stays until the very end. His name was Chukwuemeka Obi. He told her this when she asked first, which seemed to surprise him slightly. He was a civil engineer. He had been at a site meeting in Onitsha for 2 days and was driving back to Alka that night. He was not a talkative man. The car smelled of leather and a faint cologne she could not name. And there was a Fela Kuti cassette playing low on the stereo, which told her he was old enough to still use cassettes and secure enough in himself not to care. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then he asked, without looking away from the road, "Where are you coming from at this hour?" Not a "where are you going?" Where are you coming from? As if he already understood that the more important part of the story was behind her, not ahead. Sarah considered lying. She had become quite good at lying. He does the kind of low-grade social lying that people in difficult circumstances perfect over time. "I'm fine. Everything is okay. No need to worry." But something about the car, the quiet, the rain outside, the fact that this man had not once looked at her the way she feared he would, something made her tell the truth. She said, "I was sent out of my uncle's house. Tonight." He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't do that thing people do where they make a sound of sympathy that is really about their own discomfort. He just nodded slightly, as if this were information he was filing carefully. Then he said, "Do you have somewhere to go?" "My aunt in Enugu," she said. "Maybe." "Maybe," he repeated. And from the way he said it, she understood that he heard the uncertainty in that word. He drove on. About 10 minutes later, he said, "I have a sister in Onitsha. She won't mind if you stay the night. You can go to Enugu in the morning when you can see where you're going." He said this the same way he had offered the ride, simply without pressure, with the window left open for her to say no. She said yes. His sister's name was Ugama. She was a secondary school vice principal who opened her door in a housecoat and did not ask a single embarrassing question. She put Sarah in the spare room, brought her a towel and a dry wrapper, and set a plate of leftover jollof rice outside the door. Sarah ate it sitting on the bed in the quiet, and she could not have told you whether she was about to cry or fall asleep. She was both, and neither. In the morning, she took a bus to Enugu. Her Aunt Ngozi received her, cautiously, with the nervous energy of someone managing competing loyalties. But she received her. Sarah slept on a mat in the sitting room and found work within 2 weeks. A data entry job at a small logistics company downtown, 8 hours a day, 18,000 naira a month. She called Chukwuemeka once to say thank you. He said, "Don't thank me, just don't stop moving." She didn't. 3 months later, she enrolled in the Polytechnic in Awka. She used the deferred admission she had protected all those years. She rented a room with 2 other girls for 4,000 naira a month and ate 1 full meal a day. She studied at night the way she had always studied, after everything else was done, in whatever light was available. And then, 6 months after the rainy night on that Onitsha road, something happened that Sarah had not expected. Something that made her hands tremble when she understood what she was looking at. Her data entry job involved processing procurement invoices for the logistics company. She was meticulous. She had always been meticulous. It was the thing she had in place of resources. And she noticed a pattern. The same supplier appears on documents with slightly different registration numbers. The same amounts, inflated by exactly 18% on contracts above a certain value. Small enough to miss, consistent enough to be intentional. She flagged it once, informally, to a senior colleague. The colleague went quiet in a way that was very loud. Sarah went home that evening and thought about it carefully. She wrote everything down in her notebook, the same notebook where she used to record her savings, behind the entry that read, August 16th, Nak Market, 800 naira. She documented dates, invoice numbers, supplier names, and percentage discrepancies. She was not a forensic accountant. She was a girl from Anambra with a leaving school certificate and a Polytechnic admission and 4 months of data entry experience. But she had been paying attention to her entire life to things other people overlooked. It was, you could say, her only real skill. And it was enough. The company was mid-sized. The contracts were government adjacent. The man whose name appeared most often on the authorization stamps was connected. Not famous, but connected in the way that certain people in certain towns are connected, where their phone calls get returned and certain doors open quietly without being knocked. She carried the notebook for 2 weeks before she decided what to do with it. Whilst she thought about doing nothing. It would be so much easier to do nothing. She thought about what her life currently contained and what she stood to lose. She thought about the cousin who had stolen 12,000 naira and said nothing while she was pushed into the rain. She thought about silence and what it costs. And then she called Chukwuemeka. She didn't call him because she was in love with him. She called him because he was the only person she knew who had ever treated information she gave him, even the hard, uncomfortable information of her own circumstances, with careful, respectful seriousness. She needed someone who would not dismiss her. She told him what she had found. She told him she wasn't sure what to do with it. She told him she was afraid. He listened. He asked 3 precise questions, and then he said, "Do you still have everything written down?" She said yes. He said, "Then let's talk about this properly." He put her in contact with a lawyer, not a powerful one, not someone expensive and intimidating, but a young woman from Enugu named Adaku, who handled cases involving labor and financial irregularities, and who had, Chukwuemeka said, an appetite for exactly this kind of thing. Sarah sat across from Adaku in a small office with a ceiling fan that needed oiling, and she went through everything in the notebook, page by page. The case took 11 months. It was not dramatic in the way that court cases are dramatic on television. It was paperwork and waiting rooms and rescheduled hearings and moments when Sarah sat on the bus home and wondered if she was being foolish. The company's senior partners were investigated. When the procurement fraud, it turned out to be part of a wider arrangement involving several government contracts across 2 states, was eventually exposed in a report filed by an anti-corruption body. The names of the officials involved appeared in the newspapers. Nobody went to prison. That is the truth of how these things often end in this country. But 2 of them were removed from their positions, and the contracts were canceled, and a sum of money that had been quietly redirected was ordered to be repaid. Sarah's name did not appear in the newspapers. She had requested this, and the request had been honored. She was still a student. She still ate 1 full meal a day. She still studied at night in whatever light was available. But something had changed. Not in her circumstances, not yet, but in her understanding of herself. No, she had found something, and she had not buried it. She had been afraid, and she had moved anyway. The Polytechnic, when she graduated 2 years later with a distinction in business administration, gave her a letter of commendation. She framed it and put it beside the photograph from her parents. The one that had gone brown at the edges, the one she had carried in the nylon bag through the rain. She put them side by side on the narrow shelf above her desk, and she thought that was a good way to mark the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming. Chukwuemeka attended her graduation. He sat in the middle of the crowd in a light-colored agbada, and he applauded with the other guests. He had never asked her for anything. He had never reminded her of what he had done. He had simply, on one rainy night in Onitsha, rolled down a window and asked, "Are you all right?" And then he had treated her answer with the seriousness it deserved. Her uncle Obinna called, 2 months after the graduation. He had heard through the network of family whispers that travels faster than any phone signal that she had done well. He called to say congratulations. Sarah held the phone for a long moment after she heard his voice. She thought about the parlor, the television, his eyes that would not meet hers. She thought about Chisholm, the 5-year-old at the door, asking where she was going. She said, "Thank you, Uncle." And she said nothing else. Because what she had learned, slowly over years, through all the cold mornings and the missing meals and the rain and the notebook and the long bus rides and the ceiling fans that needed oiling, was that you do not need an apology to move forward. You just need the courage to keep moving. Sarah Nwosu is not a famous person. Her name will not appear in textbooks. No statue will be built. But she is real, in the way that millions of quiet women across this continent are real. Women who carry more than any bag can hold and who keep walking anyway, through rain that wasn't supposed to fall on them, toward a morning they were told they didn't deserve. And the man who rolled down a window on that road, he did not save her. That needs to be said clearly. He offered her dry and shelter for 1 night and a connection to a lawyer 11 months later. He offered her the dignity of being taken seriously. That is all. She did the rest. Every single difficult step of the rest, she did herself. So let me ask you something. Let me ask you directly, because this story deserves that kind of honesty. If someone you loved was sent into the rain tonight, through no fault of their own, carrying nothing but their dignity, would they have somewhere to go? Would you be the person who rolled down the window? Or would you be the uncle watching the television? And if it happened to you, if tonight was the night they closed that door, what would you carry in your bag? What is the one thing you would not leave behind? Tell us in the comments. Because the answer to that question says more about a person than almost anything else. Not every door that closes is cruel. Some of them, the ones that feel like the end, turn out to be the only route to somewhere you never would have found if you'd stayed comfortable. That is not a comfortable thing to believe. But Sarah believed it. Not on the night it happened. That night, she was just a girl in the rain, trying to get to a motor park in broken sandals. But years later, sitting at her desk with a framed letter and a brown photograph, she believed it. And if she can, so can you. If this story stayed with you, comment Sarah below so I know you made it to the end. And tell me, who in this story do you relate to the most? Are you the one who has ever been pushed out of a place you gave everything to? Or are you the one who once rolled down a window for someone who needed it and never knew how much it changed their life? I want to hear your story, because sometimes the comment section holds more truth than the video itself. Subscribe so you never miss the stories we tell here. Stories of real people, real strength, and the kind of truth that stays with you long after the video ends.